You know, we hear all the time that AI is supposed to make things fairer, right? That it'll finally remove all that messy human bias from the equation. But what happens when you build an AI specifically to go out and hunt for bias in our financial systems? Well, today we're digging into a fascinating experiment that did just that. And you'll see what it found tells us a whole lot more about ourselves than it does about the machines.
And really, it all comes down to this one simple question. If you have two people with the same income, the same debt, the same everything, should they get the same shot at a loan? I mean, you'd think the answer is of course, right? But as this experiment is about to show us, the reality is, well, it's a lot more complicated.
And look, this isn't just some abstract, nerdy data problem. The person behind this whole project actually saw the human cost of this stuff up close during the 2008 housing crisis. It's that personal experience that really lit the fire for this whole investigation. This idea that fairness isn't just a number. It's about whether people get to build a life, to keep their homes. So where do you even start? How do you measure something as big and messy as fairness? Well, you build a tool. And in this case, that tool was an AI designed for one specific job: to audit the lending models that are making these huge, life-changing decisions for people every single day.
Okay, and this is where things get really clever. The way this auditor AI was built is actually modeled on how our own brains work. You've got two systems. System one is basically a smoke detector. It's fast, it's statistical, and it doesn't really think. It just beeps really loud when it spots a potential problem in the numbers. Then system two comes in. This is the ethics officer. It's slow, it's reflective, and it asks, okay, why did the alarm go off? What actually caused the fire? One finds the pattern, and the other has to figure out the meaning.
So with this two-part system ready to go, the researcher unleashed it on a huge real-world pile of data. We're talking over 265,000 mortgage applications from California in 2022. So yeah, this isn't some made-up lab experiment. This is a snapshot of our actual financial world.
And wow, right out of the gate, before any of the complex AI stuff even happens, the raw data shows a pretty stark gap. You see white applicants getting approved at about 93%, while black applicants were down at 86%. Now, hold on, this by itself doesn't automatically scream bias. There can be all sorts of other financial reasons for this, but what it does show is that the starting line just isn't the same for everyone.
So this is where the audit model has to really dig in and get smart. The logic is actually pretty straightforward. First, it controls for all the legit financial stuff, income, debt, the value of the loan. Then, once all of that is accounted for, it asks the big question: does an applicant's race still make a difference in whether they get the loan?
So, did it? According to that smoke detector AI, the answer was a loud, clear yes. It found that even when you compare people with the exact same financial qualifications, black applicants still had about 11% lower odds of getting approved than their white counterparts. The smoke detector wasn't just beeping anymore. The alarm bells were going off.
And it turns out this was not an isolated thing. The disparity showed up across the board. The model found that Asian applicants also faced about 10% lower odds and Hispanic applicants about 4% lower. This was a clear systemic pattern that you just couldn't explain away by looking at income or debt alone. Okay, so the alarm is blaring. Now it's time for System 2, the AI ethics officer, the justice bot, to step in. Its job isn't to find the what anymore. It's to try and figure out the why. Why are these gaps here?
And it's not just guessing. It was programmed with a really solid, well-established ethical framework to guide its thinking. It looks at the problem through three lenses. First, justice. Is this whole system actually fair in how it spreads out the good and the bad? Then respect. Are people being treated like individuals? Can they even understand how these huge decisions are being made about them? And finally, beneficence. Is this system doing more good than harm? It uses these principles to make sense of the statistics. And what it found, well, this is the real twist in the story. After looking at everything, the Justice Bot came to a mind-blowing conclusion. The lending algorithm wasn't biased. It wasn't broken at all. In fact, it was working perfectly. All it was doing was perfectly reflecting the bias that was already baked into the decades of historical data it learned from. Which, of course, brings us to the final verdict. It turns out this whole experiment wasn't really about putting an AI on trial. It was about the AI holding up a mirror to us. And the JusticeBot itself summed it up with this incredibly powerful thought. In other words, these kinds of models, they're not really about predicting who's good for the money. They're about revealing with cold, hard numbers who our society has historically denied a fair shot.
And that leaves us with a pretty challenging idea to chew on. Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. The real work of AI ethics, it might not be about teaching machines how to care. It's about using them as a tool to remember that we still can. The goal isn't just to build a fair AI. It's to build a fairer world for that AI to learn from. And you have to wonder, what does it mean when our own creations get better at spotting our injustices than we are?